everyday people can become everyday innovators.
Welcome, Josh Linkner, to our conversation. And very few times we have guests who truly embodied one of the critical element of work that we are seeing today, and creativity is one of those things. And Josh, he has been a serial founder. Can we say that? You have founded 5 companies, so you are pretty much like a pretty stoke embodiment. New York Times Bestsellers, writing a lot about creativity. So if you are here for some creative discussion, you're at the right place. So Josh, well, with that, welcome to the show.
Truly a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks.
Awesome. So let's talk about your journey to creativity. What brought you to this side of the world?
Well, so I started my career as a jazz guitarist of all things. I've just always loved the idea of spontaneous creativity, of making stuff up as you go and improvising and being agile. And so I put myself through college playing music. But at age 20, I started a company. And by the way, I'd never taken a class in business. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was a bit of a tech nerd. At the time, I wrote software way in the years prior on an Atari 800 computer, believe it or not. But it was 1990, and I saw an opportunity, and I started a tech company. And since then, fast forward, I've started, built, and sold 5 of them, and helped get about 100 other startups off the ground. So anyway, long story short, for my 30 years of experience in business, the driving force for me has been human creativity. I'm deeply passionate about it. I really believe that me and you and others have huge reservoirs of dormant creative capacity. So if we can help unlock it and unleash it, man, the world's just a better place.
I think beautifully put. So walk us through your 5 startups. Like what were those, and what area were you into, and for our listeners and viewers.
Sure. And, to be clear, I've had some success, but none of them were Facebook or anything, which I'm kind of proud of because, we often think of creative or innovative people that unless it's Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, that it doesn't count. And I think we can all have wonderful, meaningful, successful lives without being a celebrity. But in my case, when I was 20, I started assembling PCs in my college apartment. I would literally mail order like a motherboard and an amber screen monitor and a 10 meg hard drive. And I slapped these together and sold them at a discount on campus. I ended up taking a year off of college and building up a little retail operation. Sold that before I graduated. Second company was sort of similar, although more corporate clients. I did sort of hardware installations and networking. But where that really led me to was, and I sold that company very quickly, by the way. One of my suppliers wanted my customer base. But in 1995, I saw this thing called the internet. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever because it was part creativity and part design and part advertising and part tech. So I literally started a web design company in 95, and no one even knew what a website was. At the time, less than 2% of companies had a corporate website, and I started building them. We built Ford Motor Company's first intranet, and I built Whirlpool's first website, and we built major sites. I sold the company in 99. And so I was just starting to get into the rhythm of building tech companies. But the largest company that I started and grew was called ePrize. I started in 1999. It was sort of an intersection of like half ad agency and half software company. We became the largest digital promotion agency in the world, serving 74 of the top 100 brands. I had about 500 employees by the time I sold the company in 2012.
Fascinating. So through this journey, like what brought you to the passion of talking about creativity or innovation?
What I realized early on, I mean, sort of introspectively, is I've got so many flaws. Like you don't have a long enough program to count them all. But the one thing I was kind of good at was looking at the world creatively. And the thing was interesting to me though is that I didn't think it was something that I'm naturally talented in. I just sort of developed those skills over the years. And by the way, now that I'm more of an expert in it, the research is crystal clear that I'm not more creative than you or vice versa. We both are human beings and we both can learn to be creative, just like we can learn to play tennis or learn a new language. And so it was just a technique that I started to develop, and it really became the driving force. When I was able to enjoy the success that I've had, it was through creativity. And so then I became a bit on this crazed mission to help other people do the same. I just feel like in an age where it's more competitive than ever and more fast moving and difficult, and all the many of the advantages of the past have become automated or tech or outsourced. The one thing that can save a company or a career is harnessing human creativity. It's the one thing that can drive us forward as a civilization. And I'm just passionate about helping people do that.
That's beautifully put, Josh. So in your journey, in spreading the word on innovation and spreading the word on creativity, what are some of the pleasant surprises that you have seen from the businesses or people getting it or not getting it? Like what is something that stuns you when you go out and preach about the idea of innovation and creativity?
Yeah, outstanding question. So, in this last book, Big Little Breakthroughs: How Small Everyday Innovations Drive Oversized Results, I spent over 1,000 hours in research and interviews. I interviewed CEOs and billionaires and celebrity entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders and military people, all kinds of cool people. But what I learned through that research and my other work are many of the myths are truly have been proved false. First of all, we believe that innovation only counts if it changes the world or if it's a $1 billion idea. And the truth is that innovations, the big ones are the ones we notice, but the small ones are the ones that really drive our economy and drive success for most people. And that just because an idea is small doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, that could actually be a good thing. So the book really flips innovation upside down, challenging people to look for small, everyday acts of creativity, little micro innovations, which are less risky and totally within our grasp, and they add up to big things while developing our skill set. And so I learned that you don't have to be wearing a hoodie or a lab coat to be innovative. Innovation is something that we all share, regardless of race, gender, background, age, place, position, title, etc. Another thing that I learned, by the way, is that it was surprising, to answer your question, that human creativity is within the grasp of every person. Many of us think that you're either creative or you're not. Like you're born with this gift, you're imbued with a lightning bolt from the gods, or you have to suffer and you're never going to be creative. And the truth is, and the research is crystal clear, that as human beings, we are hardwired to be creative. That's our natural state. I like to say if you're breathing, you're creative. And yeah, we may need to develop some skill set, but we all, and I mean all of us, have the capacity to be creative. And it doesn't have to do with job title. We think that the musicians are creative and statisticians are not. And that's nonsense. We can all be creative in our own ways. So all this cumulative combined to this really empowering and liberating philosophy that this is this universal truth. It's a capability that can level the playing field for those of us that are disadvantaged, and it can make a real difference in our careers, in our families, in our communities, and our lives.
I think that's so, Josh. That's fascinatingly put, by the way. So we were briefly chatting before our conversation as well. So I am myself a computational scientist, and I design algorithms to automate human behavior in software. And whenever I look at sort of how we think or the anatomy of brain, it is actually meant. It functions really well when it's creating connections. It's basically it's the act of thinking or creative and think of or creating innovations. But when we look at how we are training ourselves, like from the schools to my like academics to getting into a job and learning particular craft, it's pretty industrialized way to but stereotypically sort of hardwire some connection so it doesn't innovate that well. So what's your take on that? Like how as a business we should forge a balance between being creative and being sort of very structurally stable, if that's even a thing.
Well, there were two questions, yes, in there. The first one was around education, and I think you're totally right. Unfortunately, our educational system tends to beat the creativity out of us rather than help us develop it. I mean, you've never met a 5-year-old that isn't creative and curious, and but then it's been said that we start kindergarten with a full set of crayons and we graduate high school with a single blue ballpoint pen, and that's a shame. By the way, I'm not vilifying teachers. Teachers are heroes. It's a systemic problem. And think about what you were told in school. You're told that there's only one right answer and you better not make any mistakes. And guess what the teacher knows? And meanwhile, if you follow that path in the real world, it's a surefire path to mediocrity. Furthermore, we tend to, especially now more than ever, specialize. And so if you're specialized in computational, algorithmic, whatever, like all of a sudden you have a single view of the world. And often creativity happens by fusing and matching and mashing up things from different places of life. So if we're totally tunnel vision into a particular specialty, that can actually also further make us less creative. That's the bad news. The good news is that all of us can regain those skills. Again, it's a natural state. And so we can dust off the cobwebs, we can remove those barriers, and we can very quickly get back into the state of our natural state of being a creative person. Again, in different ways. We say creativity, you instantly think of someone painting with oil on canvas. And that's not the only definition of creativity. You can be a creative car salesman. You can write creative code. You can be a creative furniture manufacturer. You can be a creative conversationalist or parent. And so when we expand our definition of creativity, all of us can do that with a little bit of practice. And that to me is what's so exciting and liberating is that, yeah, even though our schools have kind of beaten us out of us, we can regain it very quickly and put it to use to drive the things that we care the most about as human beings.
I think that's beautifully put, Josh. So if you look at basically any company's inception and how they are formed, so some companies, so if you are at a scale stage in your incubation or in your journey, so you know the math works. You know that you don't have to be innovative, just do it more, get more hired, and if you are sort of in that rut of scaling or sort of expanding, like many times I spoke to businesses who are hiring rapidly. They fall on the trenches of when it comes to innovation. They say, hey, I have so much time, but right now I'm busy running, so I'll take a pause. And I think there's a meme going around as well that I don't have time to test out I think a bazooka, and I'm just too busy with my sword, right? So that's with that mindset. How do you, when you see from your vantage point businesses, how do you grapple, or how do you sort of console these guys, say how much they should adjust to the innovation, and what role does it play for a company that's actually pretty mature and going on, and they have seen growth by just running rather than looking around and appreciating the hacks and cracks in the ecosystem?
We're exactly right that many organizations hire smart, talented, creative people, and then they don't let them use any of those skills. And so I think as leaders, a primary role of leadership, in fact, is to create the cultural conditions to optimize the creative output of your team. If you think about it as a natural resource that becomes a significant competitive advantage when harnessed, it's almost irresponsible not to. And the companies that never create, all they do is heads down execution on the past. Let's look at those. How did that work for Pan Am Airlines? How about Oldsmobile? How's that working out for Oldsmobile? So like you look at all these, business graveyard is littered with people that were good at executing, and they just extinguish the creative vibe. So I think that here's what a leader's responsibility is. First of all, to recognize that creativity should and must come from everywhere. If you have 10,000 people, it shouldn't be from the 5 people in the R&D lab. It should be from all 10,000 people. And furthermore, people can create in different ways. We think of innovation as product innovation or marketing innovation, but why can't you have safety innovation or process innovation? So I think we can operationalize creativity as a tool and apply it to almost any area of business. So the first thing that leaders need to do is remove the fear. Fear, not natural talent. Fear is the single biggest blocker of creative output. It's that poisonous force that robs us of our best thinking. We've all done it. You're in a meeting, you have a great idea, but instead of sharing it, you hold it back because you don't want to look foolish or say the wrong thing. And so fear and creativity cannot coexist. If a leader has a platitude in the lobby that says, we love innovation, but then when someone shows up with a half-baked idea, they're sent to corporate timeout, you've trained that person to never share creative ideas again. So the first job of leaders is to create a cultural environment that supports ideation, that supports and nurtures creativity, the good ones, the bad ones, and everyone in between.
Wow, I think that's I couldn't have said any better on that. So in your discussing with businesses or in your research to the book, what have you found some of the successful stories? Like where have you seen innovation coming from odd places? Like what would you say? What have you found?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. So the book is filled with really interesting stories that you haven't heard. So it's not featuring Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and nothing wrong with those guys. Like Netflix is awesome, but everybody knows that. In the book, I cover fascinating stories of people that you don't know. I cover the story of 3 people who were working on their doctorate degree in a small lab at the UC Santa Barbara that came up with a way to significantly improve the processing of food. So it turns out that 1 of 9 people on the planet don't have enough stuff to eat, which is awful. And as population increases, that problem's only going to increase. But a lot of it has to do with food spoilage. So fresh fruits and vegetables spoil, as we know. And that actually 40% of the world's food supply goes to waste due to spoilage. So if you fix that problem, everyone has enough to eat. So these 3 everyday innovators started tinkering and figuring out and asking questions and getting curious. And they started thinking, well, how does nature protect fruit? Well, every fruit and vegetable has a peel. They say, well, what does the peel do? It keeps the oxygen out and keeps the water in. Well, and they started, again, asking questions, getting creative. What they ended up doing is coming up with something called appeal sciences, where they take the natural elements of the peel, it's all organic, and have a spray that goes over an avocado or a grapefruit or banana or a strawberry that improves the life of that peel by 3 to 5 times, which means that food doesn't spoil and gets to people who need it. The company's raised all this money. Now they're now valued at over $1 billion. And so it's uncovering the stories like that. And the cool part is that everyday innovation is happening in every sector. In the book, I cover how an ex-con who was a drug lord that was put in prison launched an incredibly successful fitness company. I cover the story of a guy in London who barely got through college who's making a massive difference in the environment. And so we sort of travel the globe together and uncover the stories of these fascinating, incredibly creative people that have enjoyed real success and made a meaningful difference, yet they haven't broken through to celebrity status. And to me, it's so encouraging because we can relate to people like that. I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to relate to someone who made $80 billion. But I can relate to people who have done cool things with their own grit and determination and creativity.
Interesting. And in your observation, what are some of the tenets that you have found common across all these stories that you can say, okay, maybe that's the precursor to something like outlandish coming?
Yeah. So the cool thing is that I did find those commonalities. Thank you for asking. And in the book, we cover 8 core mindsets, core philosophies, core obsessions of everyday innovators. And so the whole second half of the book, after we cover the research and the foundation and such, is really based on these 8 core principles. And there's some of them are kind of surprising. One, just to share a couple, I mean, one of them is called use every drop of toothpaste. And the notion here is around being resourceful and using your ingenuity instead of relying on external resources. You said earlier, many people say they want to be creative, but they don't have enough time. I hear this all the time, by the way. I don't have enough fill in the blank. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough bandwidth. I don't have enough talent. I don't have enough raw materials. But think about this. If the amount of external resources that you had equaled your creative output, the federal government would be the most creative organization on the planet, and startups would be the least. So we know that isn't true. And we know that there's ways to be gritty and scrappy. And sometimes those resource constrained situations drive more creativity. A couple other ones, just since we're chatting about it. One of them is start before you're ready, which is the principle, instead of waiting for a directive or permission or an assignment or till you have ideal conditions, when you see a problem, you just start getting after it, fully recognizing that you don't have all the answers yet and that you're going to figure it out as you go. So it's a sense of being willing to be agile and adapting and course correcting and pivoting as you go, but taking the initiative to get going quickly. So these are just a couple of the themes. There's a couple other fun ones. One is called Don't Forget the Dinner Mint, which is the notion that if you plus up a work product by just a teeny little bit of extra creativity, it can have a disproportionate net result for you. So each of the principles is backed up with research and fun stories and techniques, and it's both fun and practical at the same time.
Interesting. And if you, I'm curious, like what's the role of say abundance or frugality when it comes to being creative and innovative? Like, have you found any relation with that, with how innovative a particular company or a particular person is?
Yeah, so that's a really thoughtful question. I think that philosophically, people with abundance, their abundance mindset, that's helpful to driving creativity. Because when you think about scarcity, you're very much like worried about what you're lacking or going to let go of, as opposed to thinking that there's abundance in the world. So I think an abundance mindset is helpful. That being said, I don't think you need an abundance of resources. In fact, sometimes frugality of innovation drives better creativity. That's funny. I started writing code. I know you write code, but like I wrote code in 1983. And at that point, I had 48K of memory, not 48 meg, not 48 gig, 48K. And so what would happen is we kept running out of memory. So you had to make really efficient code. Like I'd have to go remove a comma to make sure that the code, like I didn't run out of memory. Today with unlimited memory, we don't have that problem. And I would argue that the code of the past perhaps was written in a more elegant way. So there are times when abundance of resources doesn't necessarily drive creativity, but an abundance of thinking, a mindset of abundance certainly does.
Interesting. And in your journey of preaching or spreading the voice on being creative and innovation, what are some of the things, some of the bottlenecks that you have seen businesses struggling with that are, you say, okay, these are very easily some of the excuses, you can call it, or you can call it bottleneck, however you want to see it. What are some of those, if you can share some?
Yeah, you brought one up earlier where people are really heads down. They're just, I'm doing the work of today. I got to execute. And there's nothing wrong with execution, by the way. In fact, my first book was called Disciplined Dreaming, which is the notion that you really need both of these, the yin and yang there. You need to have rigor and discipline or you got a problem, but you also need to have some creativity or you've got a problem. And so what I recommend in the same way, if you invest, even if you have a small portfolio, most people have a balance. They don't put everything in one stock. So you sort of allocate resources accordingly. You might have some in really safe stuff. You might have a little teeny bit in more risky stuff. So leaders are better off thinking about their investment of resources in a similar way. And so you might say, okay, I'm going to invest 80% of the time in really just heads down work. And I'm going to invest another 10% of the time in pretty safe stuff that's a little less heads down, maybe future oriented, but still pretty conservative. But take 5 or 10%. That's when we really need to. I think it's our responsibility to be thinking about the future. In fact, one of my arguments, I wrote a piece long ago about it, is that every company should have a chief startup officer. Not a chief innovation officer, chief startup officer. Chief innovation officers are hired and they have these big dreams and they quickly get sucked into the whirlwind and they're trying to hit next quarter's earnings targets with innovation. So they end up closing their aperture very tight on short-term gains, incremental gains. They say, we got to protect the past. A chief startup officer, all they would do is think about what would the company be? What would it look like, the company that would come along and put us out of business? What startup is going to wipe us off the map? And let's go become that. And so someone who has no line responsibilities, no ability to focus on, they're not even charged with anything within the next 2 or 3 years. They're charged with reinventing the future. I think it's a crucial role that really isn't being filled in most companies. But I think the headline here is that, yes, we need to be heads down at times, but we also need to be heads up.
That's a very interesting point. So it reminds me of a conversation I had with this executive of a heavy engineering company. And he said, Vishal, you know what? Every year we acquire 17 companies and we successfully integrate 3. So we have backlog of as far as 14 years when companies have not even will make into the DNA of this company and they will go bust. So and now imagine running that ship with that sort of high on the signal. Say everyone is guessing if you look from a statistical point of view. And now when you talk about, say, being innovative or having this culture of innovation or a culture of creativity, and then when you bring in the data scientist on that, they say, okay, when the technology is too early, too small, it's flying below the radar for any companies to figure out that what's innovation is happening. Then they go to their hockey stick growth, and then after a while they just go too big and too premium for the companies to indulge with. So they have a very small sliver window or to actually capture innovation, which could be disrupting them. And so from your vantage point, like how would you navigate that? How would you navigate that analysis?
Yeah, well, good question. First of all, I would dismiss the notion that innovation again is only big transformative stuff. So if you think of like, hey, once every 5 years, we got to catch one innovation that's either going to make or break our company. What if instead you said, hey, how about every day, if we have 1,000 people in our company, we're each person going to generate 5 new ideas. So now we've got that many thousands of ideas floating around. We're going to run constant little teeny experiments that are controlled, fixed time, fixed money experiments. We're going to purposefully discard 85% of those. 15% will merit further exploration. We'll then move forward with 3% of them, but we've got this huge pipeline of little ideas and big ideas, and we're just a creative company instead of betting the entire farm on one thing. You know, I think it becomes, people think it's risky, not because innovation itself is risky. In fact, standing still is far more risky. But betting everything on a flyer, that's what's risky. So we can de-risk the process of innovation when we stop only thinking of it as big stuff and get down to the little stuff. Second of all, though, I would say that, you know, I know you're kind of poking fun at this company from a data scientist standpoint, they had a high failure rate. That probably is too high of a failure rate, to be clear, but a failure rate of 0 is too low of a failure rate. If you have a failure rate of 0, that means you're not taking enough risks. So you say, what's an optimal failure rate? In Silicon Valley, you tend to see somewhere in the range of 20 to 40%, a minimum a failure rate, some much higher. Google has a higher failure rate than that. And that's okay. And we have to realize that stumbles and successes are part of the innovative process. Like, thank God there's many vaccines now for COVID, but think about how that worked in a lab. It wasn't like some guy ran down the hall and was like, hey, dude, I got an idea for COVID vaccine. Go print a bunch of them. And gee, I hope it works. That would be crazy. What happens is they have a couple ideas. They test out hundreds of things in the lab. Some work, some don't. They tinker, they adapt, they run a second test, they fix it, and then they march it down the field in a systematic and rigorous way. That's how innovation optimally works. It's not just betting everything on some crazy ass idea. So that, you know, those are a couple of things to think about, is that we have to be able to tolerate some bad ideas on the way to good ones, because often it's not the first idea, it's the idea that leads to the idea that leads to another idea. That's the keeper.
That's a very interesting, and COVID is a great example. So if you are in a business, obviously COVID has impacted, and this is one such case where the outside is influencing the inside, right? So I want to grow, but everything outside is sort of going in a haywire direction. So from your vantage point, what is the state of innovation when we are in this state of obscurity, or I don't know what's going on, I don't know, every external sort of parameters are changing, which is in many ways disruption does that to many companies. But like, what's your vantage point? Like, what's your take on that?
Well, first of all, a note of empathy and concern for those that have really struggled through this time, health wise and financially and everything else. Certainly don't mean to be glib about the real challenges that people have and will continue to face. That being said, looking at it from a positive standpoint, I do think there's an opportunity here in that the world is hitting a giant reset button. In other words, patterns, consumer loyalty, company processes have all been disrupted, not by our choice, obviously, to an external point, as you mentioned, but now there's a chance to rethink them. And so I think that this is giving a lot of people an opportunity to sort of reshuffle the deck in terms of how you do your work, how you do your job, how you live as a person, how you interact with your family. And as the world hits a giant reset button, there really is a big opening. That creates an opening for new entrants, whether it's a startup or a bigger company that's trying new things, because people are going to be less committed to the old way as a result of this giant reset.
Interesting. And from, would you see how businesses take innovation, their appetite changing because of this phenomena? Like, what's your take on that?
I do. I think it's accelerated innovation in many cases because people who were coasting along, and we know this, it happens all the time. You're just coasting along, riding on previous success, trying to hit your monthly bonus as opposed to trying to reinvent the world. And then, so there's no reason, there's no impetus, so people can become comfortable in their ways. COVID strikes, that's a big shaking up of things. And I think it's caused people to really take a hard look in the mirror and reconsider everything from their product line to their approaches to the way they interact and their company culture. So I do think it's accelerated innovation in many cases. I've heard many companies actually that I work with have said, you know, we've made all this massive innovation in the last few months. We had planned to do it anyway, but this served as an accelerant. And I do think that that's happening in every corner of the world, frankly.
Interesting. And what are some of misconception when it comes to, and you pointed out that it doesn't have to be disruptive. It doesn't have to be big. What are some other misconception you think people have about when it comes to innovation or being creative?
Yeah, I think that people discount little ideas, and I think that the better way to think of it is that those little ideas add up to big stuff. Harvard study recently published said that 72% of gross domestic product in the United States doesn't come from the giant ideas. It comes from the little ones, from big little breakthroughs. And so they don't earn the media attention as when Elon Musk launches a new space rocket. But it's those little things where someone does an innovative way and their closing percentage increases as a salesperson, or someone else in a factory does an innovative thing and they save, 0.2% of margin per unit. And those are not glamorous, but they add up to big stuff. The cool thing there, though, is that it's within our grasp. Like that means that every one of us can be an innovator. And I just love that. To me, it's just freeing. In fact, we in technology, we do upgrades all the time. We upgrade our hardware, we upgrade our software. And I'm saying, well, why can't we upgrade our creativity? And my suggestion to people is instead of thinking about, I want to do 100% upgrade, like I'm going from one processor to the next and it's 80% increase in performance, think about a 5% creativity upgrade, just 5%. And 5% is absolutely within the grasp of all of us. It feels really manageable and accessible, but it's a high leverage activity because a 5% upgrade might yield 100% better results. I mean, many of the outcomes in our lives are binary. You make the deal or you lose the deal. You get the job or you don't get the job. And so in those binary outcomes, which are often in photo finish type margins of error, that little boost of creativity can be the advantage, the edge that we're seeking. And so I would say that it's a pretty simple thing. If we focus a little energy on getting a little bit more creative, it can yield a disproportionately large set of results in the things that matter most to us.
Interesting. So I was talking to, this reminds me of an interesting conversation I had with this large bank. They're not known for their creativity, by the way. So I was talking to them about how can they create, how they harness the culture of creativity and innovation within their groups. And this particular person's response was that since it's very creativity and innovation is linked to so much to the culture of a company, it's very, very hard. It's very, very hard to change the culture. We try, but obviously there was a pushback, this push. So it's a constant battle. And she said, I don't see the story any different from for any other larger entities. They all struggle, and there's a reason we would rather die than being creative. And he said it's not what we want. It's basically it's the culture as a whole is designed in a way that it's very difficult to shift, and very few are lucky enough to shift that. With like what's your thinking behind it? What do you think?
Well, first of all, and I certainly don't mean disrespect for this, but if they say our choice is get creative or die, they're likely going to die if they don't. I mean, that's a prophetic. That was a good prediction there, unfortunately. And I think this notion of that we can't or that I'm a victim to it is really disheartening. In that I really think we can. And we've seen organizations transform. We've seen organizations get creative. Doesn't mean it's easy, but what things in life that are worth doing are easy. And it can happen both ways. It can happen from the top down, and it can happen from the ground up. We've seen innovation spark in little pockets in big companies, and it might be a little moonshot project, or it might be a little skunk works thing, and it grows into something magical. And we've also seen leaders take the helm of big companies and install a different set of beliefs, a different set of rituals and rewards that supports the creative process rather than restricts it. I mean, one that comes to mind is a friend of mine named Ivy Ross. She's now at Google, but she was the head of innovation at Mattel. And they were actually, even though it's a toy company, feeling rather not creative. And so she went to the CEO and said, look, is creativity part of the job or not? He said, oh, yeah, of course it is. And she said, all right, well, then we're just doing it wrong. So she convinced him to do something really cool. She said, if we can lose people for 90 days for maternity leave, why can't we let people take a sabbatical, a controlled sabbatical for innovation leave? So she created this thing, which she called Project Platypus, where she gathered cross-functional people from all around the company, different roles, different, everything, and took them to a different building on the campus. They were absolved of all line responsibility. And they would first started learning to get creative. They went to improv classes. They went on field trips. And then they were given work product to reimagine what Mattel might look like. And so she did she set up a goal. She wanted like one medium idea and two small ideas was the goal for the year, which would more than pay for the program. And in the first session, she did these 90-day sessions. They created a $1 billion idea. And it's since gone on to become this wildly successful innovation engine. By the way, not only do they create great work product, when those people go back to their day job, they've been transformed. They're a whole different mindset, and they act as creativity accelerants throughout the entire Mattel workforce. So I would say, yes, you're right. It's not easy. Yes, you're right. There are obstacles. But I think, that isn't that our responsibility as leaders is to tap the creative resources of our people. Think about it like this. If you had an oil well in your backyard and you didn't tap it, you're really not being a very good fiduciary. And on the other hand, if all we do is go after it with a little shovel that's made out of plastic, that's not going to work so well. So isn't it our job to like whatever we can do to put commercial grade drilling materials out there and get that resource to life? Well, if you think about this, creativity is a natural, non-pollutive, renewable, free resource that doesn't hurt the environment, and it's inside all of our workforces. Shame on us if we don't bring it out.
Fair point. Fair point. So, if let's talk about Little Big Breakthroughs, the book. So, by the way, very clever title. So, if you can walk us through the history of the title, what brought you to pick that name?
Well, I like the name Big Little Breakthroughs because it makes you wonder what are you talking about. Like it asks a question. We are so focused on big breakthroughs, and we fail to celebrate the little ones. And I started thinking, okay, could we help people form a daily habit of creativity instead of thinking of it as a once a decade effort? Could we make creativity more fun and more accessible? And that's the engine behind it. And when you really study great creative works, there are a series of small things that come together for great results. The book cover, I don't know if you noticed, but it's based on the art form of pointillism. So pointillism, for those that aren't familiar with art, it's a single primary color and you make a single dot on a page, like a dot of green. And my 4-year-old daughter, Talia, could make a dot of green, no problem. So the individual act actually isn't that specialized. But when you start adding a couple more to it and you add a couple other colors, each of those dots, they add up to a masterpiece. And that's really how creativity works. It's not some lightning bolt of inspiration from the heavens and then the idea appears. It's lots and lots of little dots. Even after initial ideas, it takes many dozens or hundreds or even thousands of little micro innovations to bring an initial idea to life. So creativity is an ongoing process of little teeny bites at the apple, not a giant swing. And that's what I wanted people to get from the book is that one little teeny dot at a time, we can all be creative.
Beautifully put. So if we Walk us through the research of the book. Walk us through the journey to writing this book. What have you unsurfaced? What people you talked to? Walk us through some of the stories.
Yeah, it was really a very fun process for me. I did a bunch of academic research, which, by the way, might sound kind of geeky, but I didn't present it in a geeky way. So we studied musicians and fMRI machines creating their art form and what's going on in the human brain. And there's all these fascinating discoveries of neuroscience recently, even that show that, again, back to the point that we all can be creative. And we looked at data in terms of hiring patterns and what CEOs are saying is going to be the most important job skills in the future. Um, uh, Spoiler alert, in 2025, the World Economic Forum is saying that 4 of the top 5 most needed job skills all tie to creativity in one form or another.
Mm.
So again, it really supports the case, if you will, that this is not optional anymore. It's mission critical. But then as I got into the stories, this was really fun, man. I interviewed the CEO of the drone racing league, a guy who built a brand new professional sporting league using drones controlled by remote controls and people wearing AR helmets. I interviewed a pair of inventors in Israel who reimagined the baby bottle and completely broke the mold and made a way better baby bottle. I interviewed somebody who came up with the first commercially viable electric motorcycle, and it wasn't from Harley Davidson. So we unpack these stories of these fascinating, like compelling, amazing innovators that most of us have never heard of. And to me, again, it's so cool because we don't look out that innovation only counts for the top 10 people in the country. Like if we have 300 million people in the United States, why can't we have 300 million innovators? How cool is that?
Fascinating, fascinating. So, what are some of the insights? What are some of the insights or takeaways that you got for in your research when it comes to innovation and creativity?
Yeah, again, we cover a lot of these mindsets, but also some tactics. It's funny. I tried to once and for all kill brainstorming. Brainstorming is the technique most people use to generate ideas. It was invented in 1958, and I'm sorry, but a lot has changed since 1958. And really, brainstorming is a very effective technique to yield mediocre ideas, because what happens is, think you've all done it. We're in a meeting, and instead of sharing your crazy ideas, you only share your safe ones because you don't want to look foolish. And so I share in the book a whole toolkit of fresh, fun, way more productive techniques. I think of them as idea jamming instead of brainstorming, but helping people extract the ideas that lay within. A couple examples. One of them is called the judo flip. So a judo flip is essentially looking at, let's say you're facing a problem or trying to seize an opportunity. You list out what are the traditional ways of doing it? What are all the conventional wisdom approaches? How's everybody else done it? What have you done in the past? And then you sort of draw a line down the page and then say, what would it look like if I judo flip that? What's the polar opposite of each of those assumptions? And this whole notion of oppositional thinking is a really fun way to unlock ideas they wouldn't ordinarily think of. One that I just read about, just give you an example. I thought it was really funny. So it turns out there's 65,000 Chinese restaurants in North America. And by the way, many restaurants are very boastful. Like, we have the world's best pizza or the world's, New York City's #1 coffee. And we know that's a bunch of BS. It's a bunch of puffery. Nobody listens to it. So that if that's the norm, if that's the conventional way, is say a bunch of exaggerated claims. There's a Montreal Chinese restaurant that does the opposite. They judo flipped it. So on their menu, they list each item, and next to the item it says owner's comments. And the owner of the restaurant goes and provides these hilariously brutal assessments. So he'd be like, "Oh, the Kung Pao chicken, this dish isn't very good. I'd recommend you get the Szechuan chicken instead. I think we overcooked the mushrooms." And another one says like, "Oh, I know you think this is an authentic dish, but I've been to China many times. And this honestly isn't that authentic." Or another one is, "This one's pretty good if you order in cafe, but don't take it for takeout because it'll be all soggy and mushy by the time you get home." So he writes these very funny, brutally honest, the exact opposite. It's the judo flip of what everybody else does of being boastful. And as a result, way more Yelp reviews. Everybody loves it. Here we are talking about this restaurant on the podcast. So it's just another example of how doing the opposite works. And the judo flipping is one of like 13 very fun and practical techniques that I share in the book.
Nice. And how do you recruit these stories? Like, how do you? I'm curious. Like, how do you end up picking this golden nuggets for you to share with all of us?
Well, I have a pretty aggressive research team here, and I'm always on the lookout. Like, I collect stories like that. And people send me stuff all the time. I mean, I just got an email the other day like, "Hey, how do you cool off a glass of wine?" And I was like, "I don't know." They're like, "Well, if you put ice in a glass of white wine, it dilutes the wine. But if you put a frozen grape in the wine, perfect." I'm like, boom, mind blown. Awesome. So anyway, I do get a lot of feedback and stuff. But from the book, I actually I looked all over the world, and my team and I did research up and down and found these really bizarre places. And you'd be surprised what will happen when you call people up and their willingness to talk to you. Again, I talked to several billionaires that shared their inside stories with me. And sometimes I read an article in some weird journal, and I just called them up, and I didn't always get through, but many times I did. And I personally interviewed just fascinating people around the world.
Wow, wow. And what's the incubation cycle for this book? Like, how long have you done the interviews and research it took you to get to this book?
Well, it reminds me of the old Picasso thing where, a woman asked him to draw a picture and he drew it very quickly and told her it was $1 million. And she said, "But sir, that only took you 3 minutes." And he says, "No, ma'am, that's taken me a lifetime." So the macro answer is, I've been studying human creativity and as a practitioner for 40 years. But the book itself, without being glib about it, it's about a 2-year process. I spent a good 2 years really deep hustling, in the philosophy of it, in writing it, and researching, and I'm very proud of it. Honestly, it's the best thing I've written. I'm it's no Hemingway or anything, but I do feel proud that it's a piece of art that I can be proud of.
From your vantage point, who is the ideal reader for the book? Like, who do you wrote this book for?
Well, that's the cool thing. My previous ones were primarily written for business people of all levels, for CEOs and startups alike. But this one is really more broad. It's absolutely applicable to people working on their career, people who want to grow their business, grow their career trajectory, make more money, all that stuff. But it also applies to in a more broad sense. I mean, it's for the high potential person that's just getting started in life. It's for the college student that doesn't know what yet to do. It's for the mom who's trying to become a more effective parent. It's for the person in their community that wants to give back. It's for the lawyer who wants to win more cases. It's for the dentist that wants to build a better dental practice. So it's certainly not all things to all people. But if someone says, "Listen, there are outcomes that I want in my life that I want to achieve, and maybe I'm struggling to get there," and saying it's for people to consider, maybe there's a more creative way. Maybe creativity could be a superpower that would help me seize those outcomes. And so for those that want to use a productive, sort of rigorous approach to achieving more, I think the book is spot on.
And if I am a reader, or if I am a listener to this conversation, um, should I be worried if I'm not creative? Like, what's a litmus test where you can say, okay, you are covered, or you're not, like, you should do something about it or something? Like, how would you say to a business or an individual that you should be maybe more creative or less creative? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, it's funny. It always breaks my heart when I hear people say, "Oh, I'm not that creative," or "That's not for me."
Mm.
Because again, it's so true that like we are all creative. We all have the capacity to be creative. That would like someone saying, "Well, I could never learn to speak, or I could never play tennis or something." Like you could learn it. We all can learn it. And it also bugs me when someone says, "Oh, here's my company tour. The creatives sit over on the second floor." Like, no, the creatives are everywhere. We're all creative, period. Again, some of us have developed the skill more than others. Nothing wrong with that, but we all really can be creative. So there's no person out there that is not creative that can't read the book. It's the opposite. In terms of could you be too creative? I don't think you could be too creative, but I think you shouldn't be irresponsible. The book doesn't encourage you to take crayons and draw all over the walls. The book encourages you to use creativity for productive results, not for not just for the sake of it. But I do want to answer your question. I think of creativity a lot more like your weight than your height. So for me, I'm a pretty short guy. As much as I try, I'm probably not going to be 6'4" in a couple weeks.
Hmm.
But I could grow or shrink my weight based on factors, nutrition, exercise, etc. And creativity is just like that. We can't control our heights, but we absolutely control our weights, and you can control how creative we are. If someone wants to take a quick jump on the scale, though, to see how they're doing, I put together an assessment. It's totally free, by the way. It's at biglittlebreakthroughs.com. It's really short. It's like 5 minutes. And it gives you a sense of like your weight right now. Like, how are you sitting right now creatively? And it points out a couple areas where you might want to focus on improving them. It's not criticizing you in any way. And again, everyone's weight can change over the years. It's just giving you a snapshot of where things look today and what areas might need a little extra boost.
And I'm curious to know your point of view when it comes to other sort of frameworks on creativity. So when you say design thinking on other things, like, do you think from your vantage point, if these things work, or how would you grapple if someone says, okay, can I follow a framework, or do you think it's just some like, how would you say that?
Yeah, I think frameworks in general are very productive. As mentioned, I play jazz music; it's my passion. And
Hmm.
so when I play with a group of jazz musicians, less than 1% of the notes are on the written page, and the rest we have to improvise as we go.
Hmm.
But it's not just like, crazy improvisation. There are frameworks that we use. I know certain patterns are going to work. I know that while I might have never played the exact same thing twice, I know, there's a way to navigate it. And just like you and I are speaking a language, we're not just making random syllables. Language really is a framework. And so I think frameworks in general are very good and helpful to provide a little scaffolding to help people kind of get their creativity surfaced. Whether someone chooses to use design thinking, which is great, or a different framework, I don't think that there's one size fits all. Just like when I play jazz, there's not like one scale that you'd never use anything other than that one scale. I mean, a G chord is beautiful, but so is a
Hmm.
C minor chord. Like there's many ways to do it. But I think the notion of frameworks is really productive. I share one in Big Little Breakthroughs. I shared a different one in my first book, Disciplined Dreaming. But I don't even think that there's a one size fits all. I think the more we learn about multiple frameworks, it's like learning multiple chords to play. It only is going to elevate your art.
Interesting. And if I'm a business or if I'm an individual, so you said there's a test test I can take on biglittlebreakthrough.com to understand. So if I need to put a check on or need to understand where I stand, or some quick fixes you could recommend that gets me set up, becoming creative or innovative, like what would that be? Like what would you have some things that you that people can quickly snappily do and get themselves at least a small nudge towards being creative?
Yeah, totally. That's the cool part is that it doesn't take years of study and billions of dollars and all this stuff. You don't have to quit your job. Like we can all be creative quickly. So you can answer that question differently organizationally and individually. So just starting on the individual one, in the book I cover a 5 minute a day creativity workout. So if you think about going to the gym to build your muscles, well, we can build our creativity muscles actually literally in 5 minutes a day. I do this every day. I did it today. I there's a couple. It's like doing jumping jacks for your creativity. Now, one thing I do real quickly, just so we're talking about it, is I guzzle 1 minute of inputs. In
Hmm.
software, as you know, if you want to change the outputs, you got to change the inputs. And so if we want to be more creative, one really simple thing is spend 1 minute a day, and maybe you watch a great performance of music on YouTube, or maybe you stare at a piece of art, or maybe you read a poem out loud. But just guzzling the creative inputs of others instantly frames you in a creative mindset. Second thing I do is I give myself some weird random problem, and I can give you some if you
Hmm.
want, but like one would be, what are 6 alternative uses for a pencil? Or if I had to market 10,000 ball bearings in a non-traditional way, what could I make those into? And you might say, oh, you can make them as weights to hold down curtains, or you could use them for confetti at a punk rock concert, or you could use them as robot caviar. So the idea is, using again the goal here isn't to have output. It's not work product related. It's to build the skill. So that's one thing we can do very quickly. Another thing I've suggested people do is try this. It's really fun. A 5% creativity challenge. So and this works organizationally and individually. As mentioned, we spend most of our professional lives being heads down, where we're getting the task done, crossing stuff off of our to-do list. But if you take 5% of your time for 21 days being heads up, here's what that looks like. 5% of a 40-hour work week is 2 hours. Schedule 2 hours a week as if it was the most important meeting that can't be broken. And in that 2 hours, it could be like, even if they're 4 30-minute sessions, doesn't have to be all at once. That's time where your head's up, where you let your mind wander, where you doodle, where you explore, where you click on a link and go down a rabbit hole and just let your mind listen to music or just do some of the exercises even in the book. And here's what's happened. I've done this to thousands of people around the world. First thing I hear back is a 0% drop in productivity. Zero. So
Hmm.
magically 40 hours of work gets smushed into 38 hours. No one misses a beat.
Hmm.
Second thing I hear back, week number one, people say, oh, this is so frivolous. I feel like I'm cheating on my boss. Like this is horrible. I feel so, embarrassed. But by the last week, just a couple weeks later, they say that is the most productive
Hmm.
time they spend all week by far. This is where ideas come to life, where you reconnect the dots, where you get re-engaged. And I've seen people say, oh, there's no way, this is a stupid thing. Try it for 21 days. And then years later, they're still doing it. So again, I think there's some really accessible things that don't require a bunch of time, money, or energy that can get the juices flowing very quickly.
That's, I think that reminds me of 10% happy or 10% happiness challenge. I think beautifully put. Small little steps, and I think it goes a long way, compoundingly. I think beautifully put. So, Josh, we're at the tail end of the conversation, and let's spend a few minutes on your journey, if you don't mind. So, fabulous guy. You and thank you so much for all what you're doing to educating all of us, being creative and innovative. Um, what gets you going? What's your secret to whatever you are today?
I mentioned several times I'm a jazz musician, and I started playing jazz, which is, by the way, this fun, improvisational, messy art form where you take responsible risks and make a bunch of mistakes, and it's messy and cool. And I feel like, man, I still play jazz. I just use different instruments, although I still play music. But when I'm building a company, it's sort of the same thing. It's playing jazz, or when I write a book, or talking to you. So I feel like I'm a jazz musician that has gone beyond just playing musical instruments, and I get to play jazz all the time. I've been involved in the launch of over 100 startups, either advising or helping to fund. I've invested in a bunch of startups, and one that's gone on to become a unicorn, over $1 billion value. And that's sort of the same thing. It's like this messy creative process. And that's, to me, I just love doing that. And the way I look at it, I know this sounds, like hyperbole, but I really mean it, man, from my soul. I look at the human race and I say, there's people walking around, all of us, with a reservoir of dormant creative capacity. What if we could unleash just a little bit? And I think about how different the world would be. Let's just imagine that the entire country, or the entire world for that matter, was 5% more creative. That could have a radically big impact on educational outcomes, or environmental outcomes, or commerce, or safety, or, wars. I mean, on and on, things that we care about the most. And if you were like me and you see all these people walking around with this dormant capacity, and then you recognize full well what a massive difference it could make in the world if people bring just a little bit of that to the surface, you probably would feel the same way I do, which is I feel like I'm on this mission, like it's a calling to help people bring that to life, not for selfish reasons, just because the world's just going to be a better place.
Interesting. And what are some of the some of the qualities that has helped you become what you have become? So what are some of the things that you really hone on to? What would you say?
Well, one of them is a willingness to imagine what's possible instead of what is. And we obviously cover this a lot in the book. That's kind of a definition of creativity, but it's a willingness to let go of what's right in front of you, and sort of imagine something else. And in doing so, really putting aside the executional challenge of getting there.
Mm.
So I tend to think about what's really possible and then reverse engineer how to make it happen, as opposed to the other way around. And I think another one is a lifelong learning. I just, like you, have all your books behind you. I mean, I'm constantly learning and reading. I love learning. There's nothing more fun to me than I learn something new. And by the way, you know how you learn stuff new a lot is when you screw something up. I mean, when you make a mistake, you learn pretty quick. And so today, I'm proud mistake maker. I make mistakes all the time, big and small. Just ask my wife. No kidding. But I think mistakes are really healthy, and I think we learn from them. And it's nice to be right, but it's to a degree almost better to be wrong, because now you learn a different way of being right the next time. So that's a pretty cool thing. I do think, and this is my own personal view, not that everyone should believe in it, but I believe strongly in compassion and kindness. Something that I think we're lacking, certainly in the political discourse these days, on both sides, by the way. I'm not taking a side, but
Mm.
I just think that, I've known many successful people who think that their job to be successful is to put their boot on somebody else's throat, and they're going to
Mm.
win at someone else's expense. And it's like this: if I give you an idea, it's not like you have the idea and now I don't have the idea. It's not like a zero sum game. You have the idea, but I have the idea too. How
Mm.
great is that? And so when you world back to this notion of abundance thinking, and I just think that the world gets so much better when we're kind to each other and we're supportive and we embrace that abundance thinking, and let's elevate each other instead of hold each other back.
Beautifully said, Josh. So let's talk about some of the books that. So besides your amazing book, that obviously I'll put the link to for our listeners and viewers on the descriptions. But Josh, what are some of the other books that inspires you?
I'm just going to grab my little cheat sheet right in front of me as we're talking. But as mentioned, I read a lot like you. I mean, I've got a bookshelf kind of like yours, but I'll just tell you some of my most recent favorites. I recently read a book called Range by David Epstein, which talks about not going super deep into one discipline, but having more broad perspective. Think Again by Adam Grant is
Mm.
fantastic. I'm most of the way through it. He's a wonderful author. When by Daniel Pink was terrific. Highly recommend that. Let's see. Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty.
Mm.
Wonderful, really cool. I just read Think Like a Rocket Scientist While We're Thinking Like Others by Ozan Varul, which was terrific. The Biggest Bluff by Marina Kornikova, about the intersection of risk and decision making. And I mean, I could go on and on. Catalyst by Jonah Berger was great. Upstream by Dan Heath was great. Stories That Stick by Kendra Hall I read last year, which was terrific. So, I mean, I think I'm like you, that that the more you read, the better you get. Atomic Habits was a big favorite from James Clear.
Yeah.
So we could go on and on.
By the way, all great selection. So I'll put for our listeners and viewers all the suggestions as well. So last but not the least, Josh. So if you want our listeners and viewers to take away something from this conversation, what would that be? Like, what would be your closing remark to our listeners and viewers?
I'm going to kind of go back to where we started in that I feel like I'm on this mission to help everyday people become everyday innovators. And I really just want everyone to think just for 1 second with me. Give me this 1 second to say, okay, could I be an artist? And again, let's not define artist as someone who paints on a canvas, but could you be an artist if you are a customer service rep, or you work in retail, or you are a claims processor at an insurance company? Why can't we all be an artist of what we do? What if the word artist was added to your business card? And the truth is we can. The truth is we can. We can all bring creativity to the work. You don't have to change careers or jobs or companies. We can all add art. And when we add art in our own magical ways with our own voices, oh man, it's so intrinsically rewarding. Your life is better. You feel good. And the outcomes that we crave start to manifest. So my deep suggestion with humility and love and respect is let's all become artists in our own ways. And I just think the world's a better place as a result.
I think beautifully put, Josh. And again, I could not thank you enough for being a crusader at this and basically spreading the message on being creative and innovative. And I was talking to you before our session as well that it always amazes me that how much our brain is capable of and what we end up doing with it. So I was telling someone a couple of days back that from cave to today, whatever we did, everything is in there. Like our brain is actually equipped to take from that journey to this journey. And I think it's crusader like you to help us keep reminding us that, okay, our brain can be a lot more worth what it is today. So I could not thank you enough for being that. And to your book's journey, I think I wish you nothing but success in your book. You're always welcome on the podcast back again, and couldn't wait to hear the success that this books generate. And thank you so much for your time on this.
Truly a pleasure. And thanks for hosting your podcast in general. I think you're making a real difference in the world as well. So I really appreciate it and wish you and the listeners all the best.
Thank you. So Josh, thoughts, suggestions?
I was homesick, never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick.